What is going on YouTube? Andrew Miller, Shane Black from for Shane Hook'emHeadlines.com. For me, BustingBrackets.com, contributing writer over at Busting Brackets with Fansided. It's been a little while, what, 3, 4 weeks at least since the last time we jumped on here, if not long, no, longer than that, because the Sean Miller hiring was what, 5 weeks ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I did a video on the Sean Miller hiring. I had some issues with upload. So we haven't really had much of a chance to talk about it, honestly. I know over at the site, obviously, y'all, get to cover all sports for the Longhorns, and I've done a little bit of coverage myself over at Busting Brackets, but I really wanted to come back today and talk about what the roster looks like so far. Texas is at, I believe, 11 scholarship players on the roster, and you got a few scholarship spots remaining if Sean Miller wants to fill out a few additional spots in the rotation, maybe add some shooting, some bigs. There's a number of ways he could go, but I think it's interesting to take a look at what the roster looks like now, what the starting five could project to be. Um, so anyway, I think that the Sean Miller hiring was expected. I think it's a good hire for Texas to replace Rodney Terry after his 3 seasons with the Longhorns. Sean Miller brings a certain established track record of success. He's a really good offensive coach. And, I think as far as recruiting and NIL is concerned, I think he's injected at least a little bit of energy into the program that's much needed. And, you need elevated commitments for Texas to be able to, really hang with not only the best teams in the SEC, but some of the best programs in all of college hoops. The schools like Kansas, UNC, Michigan, had just massive NIL budgets. And, um, that can be hard to compete with if you don't have the commitments from the right places. So, anyway, Shane, I wanted to pass it over to you because again, it's been a while since we recorded last. What are kind of your thoughts on the hire and how you think the roster looks and is shaping up so far?
Yeah, I mean, so we went pretty much kind of went through the hiring cycle for Texas basketball a couple seasons ago when Rodney Terry earned the job back. And so you always have the names floated out on the message board that are never going to happen, like Jay Wright and Billy Donovan, things of that nature. But among the gettable coaches, I think Sean Miller was right at the top of the list. So I think from that perspective, my original feelings were, this is a good hire. Miller has proven he can coach at an upper echelon level, had a ton of success at Arizona, never broke through to a Final Four, but I think he made like 6 Elite Eights. And if people want to use that as a negative against him, that's their prerogative. That is absolutely fantastic. If you're making Elite Eights on a regular basis at Texas, you really can't be asking much more given the history of the program. And I think you nailed it by saying he's injected a little bit of life into the program. I think that towards the end of the season, people were just, there was a lot of apathy around Texas basketball, from myself included. I think Miller coming in to a roster that was pretty bare. He was able to keep guys like Tremont Mark, Jordan Pope, Kendall Weaver, Nick Cody. I think that was huge. And then, bringing in the number 2 ranked transfer class in the country, which is a bit surprising given, we've learned more about the war chests that are being thrown around in college basketball, and Texas is probably in that second tier. Specifics, maybe 8 to 10 million is what's being reported, which puts them anywhere from like 12 to 20 in the country. And to go out and land the number 2 class in the country is huge. And we'll get into breaking down the class, but the biggest thing that stood out to me was all 5 of the players, correct me if I'm wrong, that he signed are eligible to be multi-year guys, which is absolutely huge because we saw with Rodney Terry, he was just turning and burning in his 2 years, and signing guys with 1 year of eligibility. And you look at Texas's run to the Elite Eight where they fell short against Miami, almost reached the Final Four. That was a team full of transfers that were in their second year with Texas. The Marcus Carr, the Timmy Allen, the Christian Bishop, the Dylan DeStue. So Sean Miller's kind of following those footsteps, and he said in his opening press conference that continuity is still important, that they're going to attack the high school ranks. So I think overall he brings a good balance to this program, and I'm excited for Texas basketball. I think I think, nothing to be mad at through his first 5, 6 weeks on the job.
Yeah, Miller's really hit the ground running so far. And, one theme that stuck out to me from the portal guys he's brought in so far is the theme of having remaining eligibility. I mean, kind of getting at that, but the two things that I've noticed from this portal class are you got guys with kind of two-way skill sets, good amount of length, versatility, but also that you got some development that you can have in these guys. You can build some continuity, you can build a solid foundation. You're talking about the Carrs, the Bishops, Timmy Allens of the world. Um, but Texas, you look at some of these guys, right? Like a Dalen Swain, who's got future NBA ambitions, multiple years of eligibility remaining. He really made a big jump from year one to year two at Xavier, and I believe he was the one that scored what game high 27 points in Xavier's round of 64 loss to Illinois. Um, so he participated in, I believe it was Jason Tatum's wing camp. It was either last summer or this early this offseason. I can't remember which, but he was one of only a handful of participants, around a dozen, and that's mostly guys with future NBA aspirations. Um, you know, I like a lot of the guys that Miller has brought in so far. A couple of them coming in from Xavier, Lucina Traore, has somehow a year of eligibility remaining. I think this will be his sixth year in college. Um, but he's a guy that has multiple years of starting experience, was expected to be the starting center at Xavier last season before an injury. As a whole, this is a solid portal class. I don't think there's anyone that I look at that really like wows me necessarily to the same extent. Okay, let me back up on that a little bit. There's no one that necessarily has like the all-American name recognition that you got with a guy like a Max Asmus a couple of years ago that came in as one of the great scorers in college basketball and it led not only conference but the entire NCAA in scoring. I believe it was 2 seasons out of his 5 in college. Um, this portal class, it's got it's got a foundation that this program can really lead into success in the SEC in the future and going into the 2025-26 season. Um, let's start with this. Who is your favorite portal edition so far, and who do you think has the most upside?
Ooh. Uh, ooh. I I think Dalen Swain is the obvious favorite addition just because of what you mentioned. He is that guy where there you didn't bring in someone like Ace Smith. You're not going to have a guy like Tre Johnson. So my immediate thought about this roster is like who has that take over a game type upside, who, come March 2026 could put up 25 in an NCAA tournament game. And like you just mentioned with Dalen Swain this past tournament, he's proven he can do that. And he's only growing. Like his offensive game improved leaps and bounds from year one to year two. So I think that was huge. I think he has the highest ceiling of this class. I think just given his size, if he's able to fully flesh out that offensive game and really extend his range and be a consistent 3-point shooter, I think he could end up being a special player. So I think that was probably the biggest get in the class. And then what was the second? What are you looking for on the
One
second?
with the most upside.
Most upside. So I think Swain probably falls into that category, but I do want to touch on the center from FAU. I don't know if we have I'll stick with Matas is what I'll call him. I don't know if we have a pronunciation first and last, but 10 points per game, nearly 6 rebounds a game. It seems like he eats space in the middle. One of those guys who the more he just plays basketball, the more his offensive game is going to develop. And he's someone that I think, by the time, late next season or by the time he's a junior, he
Sorry,
should be
really quickly. Modest Voikititis.
Modest Voikititis. Modest Voikititis. There we go. Okay. Hopefully that's a name that all Texas fans know by heart in like 8 months. That would be a great sign. But I think he's a guy that, he could spend 3 years in Austin, and by the time he's a senior, he could be like a 14 point per game scorer, someone that you can just throw the ball down low, can go over his left shoulder, go over his right shoulder with the hook. He's just so tall that he naturally has that length. And I do think, we noticed it last year that Texas was kind of missing that size down low. No shade to Caden Shedrick, but it was hard for him to shoulder that load alone. And so I think that is a big pickup and something that might go under the radar.
I mean, Voikatitis, I think, has the most intriguing upside to me. Just the fact that you get a 7 footer that can space the floor, that does have a good amount of upside. Um, you know, it is pretty crazy to think that all of the bigs that Texas brought in so far, Voikatitis, Traore, even if you want to include John Clark in that group, I'm not really including Camden Hyde because I think he'll kind of swing between the 3 and the 4. But I think all the guys that Texas brought in, correct me if I'm wrong here, but outside of like Zarek Onyema, they're all beefier than Caden Shedrick playing at the 5. So
Mhm.
I guess the idea that, I know you had mentioned it, but the idea of like really just watching Shedrick just getting pushed around in the paint consistently against some of the better interior post teams in college hoops, you know, I think those days are mostly over. Um, I think my favorite portal edition, yeah, Dalen Swain. I would pick him. Um, Most upside to me is either Simeon Wilcher or Voikatitis because I
Yeah.
I mean Wilcher's got some intriguing versatility in the backcourt. The fact that he can play on ball or off ball. I think he'll mainly be a off ball primary player because depending on who they put out there with the second unit or with the primary second unit, um, I could see Wilcher playing really well with a guy like a Tremont Mark who could be like kind of a primary playmaker, with Wilcher being more of like the off ball scorer, um, and more of like a secondary ball handler. And especially with Jordan Pope, who can be that initiator, that facilitator of the offense. Um, I, yeah, I mean, I think that Wilcher he's a good cutter. He's a pretty smart player off ball. He's a good defender. He's got a good amount of length, about 6'4", about a 6'6" wingspan. So a solid get there. I just think that he has some untapped potential coming into Texas, where I think that Sean Miller in a more wide open offensive system can really expand on his game. Because what he averaged like 8 points per game.
Yeah, he was eight. Does he give you a little bit of Kendall Weaver vibes? Like, at bare minimum, he's hopefully like an off the bench, give you good energy, athletic, kind of can play with the ball in his hands, but you like running him off ball. Hopefully can knock down a couple shots here and there.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say yes and no. I mean, I don't think his upside as an outside shooter is as good as Weaver's. I mean, Weaver's a 40+% shooter from deep. What, 2 out of 3 seasons? Um, for Wilcher, what is his career high? Let's see here. Oh no, never mind. 42% from three his freshman season.
Yeah, so I was looking at it.
Just kind of slumped last season.
Yeah, through his first 13 games last year, he was 15 for 37, which is 41%. And then, the rest of the season wasn't that great. So I think it's in there. He's got it in him. But we said the same thing about Kendall Weaver. And then in his first year in Texas, he didn't shoot the ball well at all. So um, I think it's an interesting point because it proves that Wilcher has a very high ceiling if he can just be consistent and knocking down shots. Like that is certainly an early X factor for the 25-26 season.
Yes, and I don't know if you followed his recruitment. I mean, Wilcher, I do remember his recruitment a couple of cycles ago. He was one of the higher rated guards in the 2023 recruiting class coming out of high school. Um, he's got a lot of upside. It's just, can he find his role playing off ball? And again, I have a lot more faith in Sean Miller's offensive system that he can find that role.
Mhm.
And another thing, he was one of the most improved players year over year in the Big East this past season among the backcourt guys. You know, almost tripled his scoring output. You know, became a much better defender, I think, much more effective. Averaged about a steal per game and about half a block. Playing kind of that combo guard role for the Red Storm. Yeah. Um, okay. So anything else you want to mention for the portal class so far?
No, I think just a note on Cam Heidi. I have a Purdue buddy who has watched every single game that Heidi has played in college, and his note was he's extremely athletic but inconsistent on defense and in shooting, decent rebounder and okay passer. So that was the Purdue sentiment. It sounded like they weren't too upset to lose him. Hopefully, it's someone that Sean Miller can develop over 2 years. I think he's going to be a good locker room culture guy, regardless, like seventh, eighth man off the bench.
I'd agree. I just don't. I think that Heidi was a tough fit at Purdue at times.
Hmm.
Purdue is what they don't play it at a super fast pace. They don't, to be honest, they're usually what like a one or two man offense. Um,
Yep. It was Trey Kaufman, Wren, and Braden Smith last year. And it's a good point. Like if you Heidi's super athletic, if you get him out and running, like I mean, just look up his highlights if you're watching this. He had some crazy dunks last year. So if you get him out on the fast break, I think he could do some damage.
and his contributions were meaningful when he played. Like, I mean, this is a guy like his BPM 5.9, top five on the team. Win shares per 40 at about 1.15 for the past two seasons. That's above average. He took so many threes when he was on the floor because let's see here. Yeah, of his three field goal attempts per game this past season at Purdue, almost two and a quarter of them were three pointers.
Hmm.
Um, he can be that knockdown shooter I think that Texas is looking for. Correct me if I'm wrong here. I feel like Texas has more knockdown shooters in the front court than they do in the back court right now, that they can space the floor.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I think that's an overall issue with the roster is I don't think the front court. I mean, I think if you look at it on a macro level, the front court is a pretty decent shooting front court, and the back court is not that good of a shooting back court. And so, in totality, it's probably not going to be that good of a shooting team unless, Wilcher hits, Weaver hits, Pope finds some of his Oregon State form. Like there is a lot of variables here.
I guess I'm not really including Travon Mark in the backcourt necessarily because I think he's more of like at this point filling that role more like a true wing.
Well, that's a discussion that, we don't have to get down the rabbit hole now, but that's something that when the season gets closer, we're gonna have to, get some intel and have a discussion on do we think Mark is going to play with the ball in his hands very often? Because he played his best at Texas under Rodney Terry the last month of the season when he was running as primary ball handler a lot of the time.
Right.
And if you look at this roster, like there is no obvious point guard. I think Jordan Pope proved that he's better kind of off the ball last year. And then you have Wilcher as well. So that's something that is definitely going to be a question that needs answered this summer.
Yeah, the front court definitely has more depth and potential right now um, than the back court. Okay, let me bring this to a higher level kind of picture right now with the Texas roster. Um, where where do you see there being, you know what? Let's get to the biggest need last, actually. I'd rather talk about the starting lineup, what that could look like. So, I believe it was yesterday, maybe earlier today, something like that. I had an article posted at Busting Brackets with a projection for Texas's way too early starting five for the 2025-26 season. Um, just kind of giving a snapshot of where things are at right now. A couple of weeks after the portal, what was it, like late April that the portal window closed for new entrants. Um, one of the things that I think is kind of underrated, you had mentioned earlier about what Sean Miller did was he was able to retain, I think it's something like 36, 37% of the returning minutes for Texas for this upcoming season. Um, they rank, I believe it's third in the SEC in returning minutes percentage for projected rosters for the going into the 2025-26 season. And bringing in a new head coach and being able to do that is one thing. Um, but really hitting your marks with certain players that, you know, had years of eligibility remaining and still had a lot of development to go was really impressive to me. You consider this, even with who was it? Was it Jamie Vincent that said he was coming back? It was,
And then he went to A&M.
yeah, I think it was Jamie Vincent.
Yeah, I don't know if he ever explicitly, maybe he did say he was coming back, but yeah, he's at A&M now.
Yeah, I think it was him. Anyway, um, maybe it was Malik Presley. It was one of those two. But those two guys didn't really. I don't even know if Malik Presley played any minutes last season at Texas, but
No, he redshirted.
they were still. I think both could have been good players at Texas. And so when you consider that, you had a guy that said he was going to come back and didn't. Left for another school in the SEC. You still have this core intact, and you bring in some other guys with proven experience at other major conference schools. Um, Texas has a good roster forming for next season. Um, as far as what the starting lineup um, in the front court can do, I think that there's more. Here, hold on a second. For this upcoming season, I think a lot of the kind of more like proven and experienced players probably will get the edge. To get more allotment for starting minutes out of the gate. Um, I don't know if you disagree with that, but I would put some of the guys that Sean Miller is more familiar with, and then some of the guys that were able to be meaningful contributors in Texas, coming out of the portal this past season, years past. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense. I think if you look at how the roster is currently constructed, the only two guaranteed starters are Tremont Mark and Dalen Swain. And then from there, you're gonna have one of
So you don't even think Jordan Pope is guaranteed?
no, I don't. I don't. I actually saw someone else who wrote an article, I forget what site it was for, predicting the Texas lineup, and they had Pope coming off the bench. Um, because that would mean you start Wilcher and Weaver, and there still could be someone out there in the portal that you still grab. I mean, Texas still has some scholarships available. There still are good players in the portal, and we'll get into potential need at the end of the video. But yeah, for me, it's Mark and Swain for sure, and then one of the two centers, either Traore or my man Voca. I need help here. I need help. I'm calling in the reliever. Voca what?
Wicketitis.
Voicatitis. So one of them two is going to start alongside Swain and Mark, and then I do think Pope will get the nod just because of his offensive ability, and probably Weaver as well. But you have seen, I mean, you saw Rodney Terry. He liked to use Weaver as a spark plug off the bench, so it's an interesting concept. But I think Weaver is definitely a guy who will be closing a lot of games, regardless of if he starts or if he's the sixth man.
Yeah, I could see Kendall Weaver being, a really important player to start games for Texas this upcoming season. The defensive value he brings, like you're saying, the energy, the floor spacing, I think is also an important piece here for Weaver. The fact that he was able to shoot 40% from three again this past season. That was one of the things I had heard coming out of camp last offseason was that, in training camp, not Pope, Weaver had really gotten down to business and, improved his jump shot. I'd say improve with the caveat that, like, obviously he was a really good shooter during his freshman campaign at UT Arlington.
And
Um,
sorry to hop in. I think it's also important to caveat that he was only 8 for 20 last year.
yeah,
Um,
that's true.
because
A
he
small
played,
sample size.
yeah, played in 20 games, took a three a game. But if he's able to hit at a 40% clip and sustain that on like 2.5 attempts a game, like he did his freshman year, that's massive.
Yeah, I think didn't he make like five of his last 12 threes? I think something like that.
I just had his game
I'd
log
have to
up.
jump back into the stats, but I know his distance shooting, mid-range shooting was a lot better down the stretch once he came back from injury. And just in general, I think his contributions were really meaningful, and it kind of showed the difference that he made when he was in the lineup and healthy for Texas in the postseason, the SEC tournament.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so the starting five here, this is my projected starting five that I had for Texas, given the current roster, 11 scholarship players, a handful of walk-ons as well. Um, I got Jordan Pope at the one.
Mhm.
I think that his proven ability to facilitate the offense, score the basketball, he was what for 2 seasons Oregon State's leader in points and I think one or two in assists. Um, and so last season he averaged a little under two dimes per game. So that him playing off ball, as you said, might be a better fit for him in Miller's system. I went with him here, as I said earlier, mostly from like the proven experience perspective and just that he is the sure thing starting at the one. Um, he's also, I want to note for the backcourt scoring, he's Texas's top returning 3-point scorer. He's the only guy that had knocked down, I believe it was over 25 3-pointers last season while shooting over 35% that's returning this season. So, getting some of those efficient outside baskets, again, I think it's going to be valuable for him in the starting five. I got Kendall Weaver at the two. I just think that with some of the new pieces you have coming in, and honestly, just a lack of younger guard and developmental player depth at the guard position coming out of this spring, I think Kendall Weaver is probably right now your best and most proven backcourt defender, probably the most switchable. Um, and again, a guy that when he is on um, offensively can be a solid off-ball threat. Obviously, he's just an offensive rebound machine. And I think while you're kind of mixing and matching some of the pieces together for like floor spacing from the three and the four, Weaver gives you a sure thing at the two. Um, I got Tremont Mark at the three, playing kind of that true wing role. Um, like you said, he really found his scoring touch down the stretch last postseason. He was a really good clutch time player, I think, for Texas too. When it came to some of the bigger ranked wins in the SEC, he hit that what game-winning buzzer was it buzzer beater like with a couple seconds to go against A&M.
Yep.
Um, I also he was impressive against Xavier. I think he was one of Texas's better players. Had over a dozen points, shot around 50% from the field. Um, Miller convincing Tremont Mark to come back, I think was probably the biggest win
Mm.
on all the returning players. Um, and I like the ability for Mark to fit with some of the new pieces because again, he can initiate from different spots on the floor. I think he's got pretty good court vision. He's a decent passer and just a good playmaker, and he can create from all levels. Um, he's a pretty good tough shot maker. It didn't start out great last season. I think didn't he have a hip injury he was battling right before the start of SEC play, or was
Yeah, and
it
he didn't play against Ohio State to begin the year. Like he was banged up heavily
right?
last year.
Yeah, he was fighting lower body injuries for a lot of the season, and it really took him until February, March for him to really find his role. Um,
Yep.
and he's a guy that on contested three-pointers in February, March last season, shot above 35%. Um, so, he's good, tough shot makers that are that experienced and proven are not easy to come by, especially when you're able to, get a guy that has played in the SEC for what, 3 years now, 4 years, 3 years, something like that. So, um, like you said, he's probably the one that you can say is the guaranteed starter right now. I'd say the other guy that is pretty much a sure lock for the starting five is Dalen Swain. Coming over from Xavier, I think he was one of their biggest, like most important players in the front court last season. Really, I think really like developed into a more complete power forward. And he's got what 6 foot, 6'8", long wingspan, good vertical athlete, potential future NBA guy. So I think he's going to be a key part of the starting five. Play pretty significant minutes for Texas. And then at the five, I think this could be still an open battle. I picked Lucina Traore over Voikatitis at the five because Traore was expected to be Sean Miller's starter at the five last season at Xavier. Um, I, his stats from what was it, Long Beach State, where he started his career,
Yeah.
were
Or he
pretty
started
good.
his career somewhere else, actually. Then he played 2 years at Long Beach
Oh, Long
State.
Beach, okay. Um, he provides a good interior presence. I mean, I list him at 6'9" because I think that's what he was listed on Xavier's roster, but I think in shoes probably 6'10", good wingspan, decent size. Um, Again, 220 pounds. I think that also is a little slim. I looking at Sports Reference has him at about 235.
Hmm.
Um, I I think he probably is a guy that can give you 25 minutes, 30, maybe 28 minutes in the starting five. You could, and you're probably looking at Voikatitis being kind of that first big man 7-footer off the bench for this
Yeah.
upcoming season. Anything that you would change here?
No, I had the exact same lineup. I think that the only uh, Traore was 12 and 10 in his 2 years at Long Beach State, like double double machine, obviously at a lower level, but the production is there. If he's not fully recovered from his knee injury, that's where I could see Voikatitis starting in November. But I mean, let's just hope for full health at that point for Traore. But no, I completely agree with the starting lineup. I think that the ability for Miller to mix and match guys in the front and the backcourt, like you could play Voikatitis and Traore at the same time a little bit. That'd be an interesting bigger lineup. You can go, four guards. You can have Mark bringing up the ball. So I think there's just a lot of versatility on this team, which is interesting for us to ponder about how it's going to look because, there are some questions, but questions can be a good thing. And one other point that I'll make is you noted that Texas returning like 37% of their minutes. That may seem low, but know that it's not in today's day and age of college basketball. Like that is a pretty solid, cohesive unit of guys coming back. So I think the combination of those returners and the five transfers they're bringing in, hopefully adding a sixth here in the next couple weeks, I think is really has an exciting roster on paper.
If it to put things in perspective too for the returning minutes, Texas, um, the year after Rodney Terry was hired as the full-time head coach, returned, I believe it was about 28% of their minutes. So 10% less roughly than Texas is getting with some of these new portal additions um, coming over from Xavier and things like that. So okay, who do you think? This is one last thing I wanted to ask before we jump to another topic here. Who do you think is the sixth man for Texas's kind of that key part of the core rotation?
I think it's whoever doesn't start between Weaver and Wilcher.
Okay,
I think they slot in as the sixth man.
yeah, I think the sixth man is where you kind of get that like maybe not in the starting lineup, obviously, but like I think that's where you could kind of get that sort of like, I don't know, not like a Marcus Carr type bump, but like a like a Serge Barry Rice
Yes. Yeah.
type edition. I mean, what was he, sixth man of the year a couple of
Yes.
years
Yep.
ago? So,
Mhm.
that'd be setting the bar pretty high. But I think that, yeah, I think there's still a lot of solid guys out there in the portal that Texas can go after,
Mhm.
um, use up some
And
of those remaining scholarship spots.
And I almost think that with a coach like Sean Miller, it doesn't even matter as much who's starting. Obviously, I mean the age-old adage, it's who's closing games, but more throughout the flow of the 40 minutes of the game. When you have such a strong offensive mind, like a good basketball coach, he's going to
Mhm.
mix and match lineups to match his opponent. So regardless of who is starting, guys, he's going to put guys in an advantageous position to succeed. And just because you're starting doesn't mean you're going to, play top 5 minutes on the team. So that's kind of the
Right.
faith that I have in Miller to make that all work out.
I think you mentioned something interesting earlier with the idea of really like kind of expanding the rotation and having, I mean, if you get another, you see a contributor, two, maybe three guys that, um, really like have a big breakout training camp or something like that, where they really kind of find their role, during SEC play going into next season. I Texas could have one of their like more switchable, complete two-way rotations that we've seen in the past few years on the 40 acres. Okay, so one thing I wanted to talk about was looking at potential like portal needs that remain, like what
Yeah.
Texas still has left, and
Hmm.
what type of portal players they could be looking at to add to the rotation in the remaining key spots.
Hmm.
The two for me are potentially an experience like I potentially like an experience maybe like third, 4 year power forward or center,
Yeah.
kind of round out the front court depth.
Yes.
Give guys like Nick Cody and John Clark that we haven't even mentioned. You might have mentioned Nick Cody earlier, with some of the key returning guys, but like I think getting him back was huge because I actually really liked what he did.
Yep.
What a 20-point game, um, in a blowout win last season for Texas and in the non-con at home.
And he just seemed really long and active when he
Center.
was on the court. Like he's a ball player, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he was the number one recruit from Texas in the 2024 class.
Hmm.
Top 50 guy out of the DFW area from Newman Smith High School up in Carrollton, not too far from where I am. Um, right up, what would that be, Highway 14? Anyway, I think for Texas, getting, I don't know if it's more wing support or just more like, I don't know, more like tertiary distributing
Yeah.
role, kind of in that combo guard role.
Yep.
You also have said I wouldn't rule out them trying to pursue like more of a true point guard if the
Hmm.
right, if the right guy to fit the system shows up in the portal, or well, I mean, obviously portal's closed, but like, you know, something develops here in the next few weeks.
Yep.
That would be mine. I would also, I guess, like just a small thing, would like to see more guard scoring or like more like outside shooting.
Yeah, no, I hold the same sentiments. You nailed the two that I were going to mention. I think just given, I mean, we mentioned the depth at center and with Heidi who can mix and match at the three and the four, but given the youth of Cody and Clark, it would be nice to have a more experienced, power forward like you mentioned. But yeah, I think my biggest need is someone who can play with the ball in his hands, who also can knock down the three ball. Like someone that can come in and settle the offense down. It doesn't even have to be starting caliber, but a guy that can give you 18 minutes off the bench, shoot like 38% from three, is a good passer. I think that would be huge for this team. I have three names, or two names I'll throw at you real quick. Tyler, and this is important to remember regarding the portal. So the portal's closed, no more entrants, but On the on three composite rankings, 19 of the top 100 players are still uncommitted. So there still is a lot of talent in the portal. And if you think about Arthur Kaluma, he didn't commit to Texas until June 27th of last year. So I would be very, very surprised if Texas didn't add at least one more scholarship player. The two guys that I'm looking at out of the portal, Tyler McGee, who is a rising senior. He was on the UC San Diego team last year. He's 17 points per game, shot 38% from three on nearly nine attempts. So really good shooter. Not as much of a true point guard. He is from Denton. He went to Denton Guyer. So, potentially some connection there. He would be more on that wing type, but just a real flamethrower that could be interesting. More the point guard archetype that I think we're looking for is Isaiah Swope, who was an all A10 guy from St. Louis last year. He was 17 points a game, over four assists a game. He shot 36% from deep. As a freshman, he shot over 42% from deep. So I assume he's got a pretty high height price tag. I mean, he's undersized. He's listed at 5'10, 170. But last year, like I mentioned, he was all A10, 17 points a game, 4.2 assists, 3.2 rebounds. So he could be someone that could really raise the overall ceiling of this team. But just some names to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few for me that like are intriguing. One that I think like the idea of him would be good two-way sort of like 3 and D wing, but like also, you had mentioned the NIL, really kind of that salary cap piece where, is Texas looking to really get a guy that's going to cost them, like a good portion of the NIL budget with whatever they have remaining on scholarship wise. And I just don't think that Texas is really looking to run that direction right now in the portal, after the spring window. Um, the one to me though that would be intriguing is a guy like Keontae Jones, believe from CSU Northridge. Um, I was looking into him before we started recording when we were talking about some of the portal stuff, and I name it jumped out to me because he was committed, I believe, to USC,
Okay.
but he decommitted. Apparently, he's been in contact with Auburn, but potentially a name. He's a guy that averaged, I think it was like 9 rebounds a game, shot 39% from three, 6'6", about a 6'9" wingspan. I mean, that's the obviously would be a luxury to get because then you could really have like two alphas almost in the rotation between Mark and Jones. But like you get a guy like that, it's almost like the Kaluma edition, like that level of impact that you had last, like what was it, late last summer. Um, Kaluma arguably second best player on the team
Yeah.
for the Longhorns last season.
Yep.
Um, you know, uh, a few other guys for me. If you were to go after a point guard, it's kind of tough because I don't think there's like a ton of guys left that wouldn't cost you a ton of money. I mean, Desmond Claude would
Yeah,
obviously
he's
be a great one to get, but
yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, I'm more looking maybe a name that jumps out to me a little bit, like anyone really in the backcourt that can knock down threes. I think is going to be someone that you would want to get. Um, is
Exactly.
there?
I do think Swope would be a great. I mean, there really hasn't been any noise about his portal recruitment since he entered on April 21st, but I mean, he looks impressive. And anyone,
Yeah,
he played under Josh Schertz, like similar system to Miller. I think he could work, depending what the number is. Speaking of like overall macro roster construction, just a quick point here before we close it out. I do think we mentioned at the top of the video the way that Miller built his transfer class was adding all guys who, or besides Trower, I think all guys who have multi-year of eligibility
mhm.
could be of the mindset, you have the conversation with CDC and the powers that be and say, hey, we're not going to go all in this year, get your feet wet, hopefully make a tournament, win a game or two, but you're going to bring a lot of these guys back. And then, hopefully you have a whole cycle of recruiting the high school and potentially international ranks. And then next year, is where we really go after like some of the top dogs in the portal. I think that could be an interesting and it just this is all hearsay from my own brain, but it could be a strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll wrap up with this. Yeah, there's two things I actually wanted to wrap up with, but I do think there's a lot of potential for Texas to be more of like a 2026, 27 team um, coming out of the SEC because I think the ceiling on the team this season is probably going to be like a middle single digit seed um, for like the NCAA tournament. So yeah, I mean, I don't see that player on the roster right now. Like even like a Tre Johnson that can really take Texas to that elite level of the SEC. Um, I see a lot of solid players. I don't see that like unless Tremont Mark really like comes into his own and ends up being like an all SEC first team type player. Um, Easier said than done though. So okay. Um, Two things. One, I want to talk about what you think. I like honestly what you think the top end ceiling is for the team right now and where you think
Mhm.
that can go. Before
Yeah.
that, I want to talk about because potential future plans on the channel to talk about more like NBA draft, kind of more discussion mock drafts, that sort of thing. Um, with the NBA draft lottery tonight, let me go and pull this up here. I know that the Mavs won the draft lottery, so Cooper Flag, kind of generational talent going to the Mavs here a moment ago. Okay, so I've got of course, like a lot of websites had their early mock drafts ready with the lottery coming out. Um, so showing here, Dallas winning the lottery, obviously picking Cooper Flag as their next franchise player. The Spurs getting number two pick, Dylan Harper, forming kind of the future duo with Victor Wembanyama. You got Ace Bailey going to the Sixers, Edgecombe, that's early. Um, and Charlotte just got hosed again in
Yeah.
the draft lottery. And then you got Tre Johnson going fifth to the Jazz. Um, where do you think Tre Johnson goes? And could you see him maybe getting into the top three potentially?
I I so I think I mean Flag's number one. I love Dylan Harper. Like I think Flag is can't miss, but I think Dylan Harper is almost as much can't miss as Flag. Um
Dylan Harper
and
probably would have been the number one overall pick.
like the last, yeah, I mean,
Last
obviously
year
they have
at least.
Zion but I think Ace Bailey's probably going to be the third pick. Just, I mean, he's got that, like baby Kevin Durant type build. And I think people are going to, I mean, the Sixers are going to fall specifically, are going to fall in love with that. I mean, because if you look at the Sixers, I mean, we don't have to get too deep in, but you look at the Sixers roster construction, you know, you have Jared McCain, you have Tyrese Maxey. Are you really going to play Tre Johnson at the three? Probably not. I think Ace Bailey fits better there. So potentially, I think the ceiling for Trey is four to the Hornets.
I'm gonna go. Yeah, I would agree on that. Actually, I think the ceiling for him is three.
Mm.
Um, I
I think if the Sixers took him, they would have to. They would. I mean, they would have to trade McCain. Uh,
right. Yeah, I
which
mean,
yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I just don't think it's a good fit. I think it'd be unfortunate if he
trading
went to
up
the
for the
Sixers.
Spurs spot, I could see.
I'm just so high on Dylan Harper that I don't see it, but potentially. I mean, because you look at it, they're gonna have De'Aaron Fox for the next 5 years. So unless they see Dylan Harper playing off the ball, which I think he certainly can play off the ball, but they could say, hey, I don't think Dylan Harper can play off the ball, and I don't want Ace Bailey, and therefore give me Tre Johnson on the wing. I think that could be a possibility.
Yeah.
It's fair. Yeah.
I could see him going to the Jazz because that would give him a wing score to kind of help boost their rebuild roster.
Yeah, that would
Um,
suck though for Texas fans. I mean, just out in the middle of irrelevancy, but
you make some Mormons mad.
yeah, yeah, they
Um,
got a strong fan base. They already have Tre Johnson with Keontae George. I guess Keontae is smaller, but
yeah, I mean the Jazz got some intriguing young pieces, but it's like I don't really know where they all fit together a lot
yeah.
of the time. Um, I could see so the two most realistic, actually, I could almost go with three most realistic spots because I just don't see Tre Johnson falling out of the top seven, like kind of the
Hmm.
top half of the lottery picks. I I see two, maybe three realistic landing spots. I could see the Hornets. Trey would give them another, go-to score, but I think the Hornets are probably looking for more of a two-way forward than they are like just another bucket getter. Because I mean, you already got what Brandon Miller, you already got LaMelo Ball. I, even though they've had some health issues, those are still kind of the core pieces you're building around there in Charlotte. Also think Charlotte had its sights set, obviously, on either getting Cooper Flag, Ace Bailey, or Dylan Harper, and they're all realistically going in the top three. My other team that I could see him going to is the Pelicans. Um, I, I think that would be an interesting spot for him to go, and I think the Pelicans do have some good scores that he could learn from, but
Yeah.
Pelicans do need to get younger and healthier. Um, at certain spots on the roster because you got CJ McCollum who missed a few games last season. He's not getting any younger. Zion, obviously, he hasn't played a full season in the NBA yet. What did he miss? Like 50, 60 games this season, this past regular season for the Pelicans.
Mm.
Um, so you think he goes to Charlotte?
I think 4 to 7. I think it's too early to say. I think 4 to 7. I like your bottom out of 7. I think that makes sense. Um, I think people are going to fall in love with Charlotte, specifically Edgecombe over Johnson. So I think 5 to Utah actually makes a lot of sense, which, as I mentioned, I'll say it again. It's a bit unfortunate, but so I'll go with 5 if I have to make a choice.
Okay, and then uh, let's wrap up here. Okay, so. You know what? We throw out bold predictions sometimes around the end of our videos. So I've got one that we can do here to wrap up. But also, I said that I think really I think Texas's potential for this upcoming season in the SEC is probably going to be around that, middle lower tier.
Hmm.
It really all depends on how deep the SEC team wise is going into the upcoming campaign for 25, 26. I just don't think you're going to have 13, 14 tournament teams coming out of the SEC again, but maybe eight or nine. And I think Texas among those eight or nine could probably be in the lower tier, maybe a high single digit seed, maybe a middle single digit seed. Sean Miller just has such a consistent track record of making the NCAA tournament. Let me see, a three, four-time conference coach of the year, made what is it, over a half dozen Sweet 16s. So I I think Texas gets to the tournament. I think there's a ceiling right now on this roster. What about you?
Yeah, no, I agree. I'd be surprised if they didn't make the tournament, given how good of a coach Miller is, and he's assembled some solid talent, but you're missing that high end type of player like an A. Smith, like a Tre Johnson, even like a Marcus Carr. So I think that kind of limits your overall ceiling. And we've mentioned a lot of the holes that are on the roster. Not a lot of holes, but there are certainly some. So yeah, I mean, I think kind of in that it's one of those things where you hope you can end up being like a 5 or a 6. So if you do win a first round game, you can avoid a top 8 seed. But you could tell me they're anywhere from a 6 seed to like a 10 seed in next March, and I would believe you. So
Okay. Um, Last thing, who of anyone on the Texas roster right now, who do you think has the best chance? of being a future NBA draft pick.
Yeah, it's Swain, no doubt.
Swain, yeah.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, there's a chance that Swain is like the fourth most impactful player on this team. I don't think that'll be the case, but it could happen. But regardless, it's Swain. You could try to talk me into Nick Cody, but I think just with what Swain has shown,
Yeah.
especially being able to develop that outside shot a bit, it's scouts are gonna like that. I hope the conversation we're having 10 months from now is Dylan Swain gonna stay or go? Like that would be great because that would mean he had a terrific season, which I think he's capable of.
I, you know, I would agree that I think Swain is the safe pick. Um, I'll throw another name out there,
Hmm.
Boyka Titus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I mean that sort of length. If he can develop into a more formidable interior post presence, I I would imagine that maybe a late first round pick, someone that is willing to take a flyer out on a guy that has the tools to be a solid like second unit anchor.
Yeah. Good
And
point.
if he can expand on his shooting ability, then yeah, I think that having a 7 footer that can provide versatility and has decent athleticism and rebounding can definitely be like an NBA type package mold. So,
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
all right. Well, I think we're going on over an hour of recording now. So, um, we had a lot to talk about. Obviously, catching up on where the roster is at right now with Sean Miller and the Longhorns. Texas, I think, is in a good spot. I was looking at it earlier, and I do think that there's a certain I think there's a certain drive right now to really kind of think of like what the roster mesh is going to look like. I was looking at it today, and you mentioned Texas actually has the number one rated transfer class according to On3. Um, but in 24/7 Sports, I believe they're at 22. Um, and I think what I'm trying to say with this projected roster is that if you put in, let's say, a dozen quality players, I don't think Texas is going to have like the sort of up and down offensive, defensive inconsistencies that they had last season. This roster has a lot of balance, has a good amount of length. It's the same thing I said at the beginning of the video. I really do like the two-way switchability from these guys. So, um, yeah, I mean, we'll see where it goes from here. But I mean, I think there's more hope and potential than there was, a month ago, 2 months ago.
No doubt.
So,
100%.
anything else you want to sign off with?
No,
All right.
no.
All right. Well, for Andrew Miller, Shane Black, that's pretty much it. Welcome.